Okay, so looking at the fourth commandment, I think is actually quite confusing. While every one of the 10 commandments is still binding for the Christians today, each of them have been deepened and transformed by Jesus, intensified, if you like, when we look at the New Testament. This commandment, I think, has changed the most. And that's probably why Christians for 2,000 odd years have not always agreed on how to obey this commandment. Within our history, there are many different understandings of what it means to observe the Sabbath or to observe the Lord's Day. Now, first, what is agreed? Let's start on that. What is agreed on observing the Sabbath? Well, first of all, there is one day in 7 for Sabbath. That was right from the beginning, from when God created the world. Just as God rested from creating on the 7th day, so too Christians, by and large, have rested on one day of the week. We, as Christians, rest on Sunday, the 7th day of the week. Actually, it's not, is it? We rest on the first day of the week. We don't rest on the Sabbath. Saturday is the Sabbath. Jews still observe Sabbath on the Saturday. But Christians, right from the beginning, decided to meet on Sunday, the first day of the week, because of the resurrection. The resurrection changes everything. We live now in light of what happened on that day. And so Christians automatically met on Sunday because it's the day of the resurrection. And so this commandment to observe has been a little bit controversial or confusing at times. But I want to say it doesn't make it any less important. This was critical to Israel's very identity. This is really the one thing that marked them out as different to the rest of their world. It's the longest of all the commandments. It's the most detailed. And Sabbath observance is mentioned more than any other of the 10 commandments in the Old Testament. Surprising, isn't it? The Sabbath was critical to Israel. And the Sabbath, that one day in 7, is the only day on the Jewish calendar where they were to rest, besides one other day, and that is the Day of Atonement, which was one day a year. And interestingly, it seems from Exodus 16, if you want to look this up earlier, that the Sabbath day was given to the Israelites even before they had left Egypt. If you want to have a look, Exodus chapter 16 implies they were having Sabbath as they left Egypt. So it's before the law. This is given to them before they had received the law. It was not just to Moses first, but it was given much before that. And that's because Sabbath is part of creation, part of God's creation, part of life. God created for 6 days and then he rested on the 7th. So it's fundamental, I think, to the world and not just to a group of people. Here's a question for you. Have you ever thought where the concept of a week or 7 days comes from? You probably haven't. It's natural to us, and it is. But we get days simply by the rotation of the earth, 24 hours. We get months by the lunar cycle. We get years by the earth travelling around the sun once. We have observable scientific data for each one of those measurements of time. But there are no natural rhythms in our earth for us to observe to come up with a week. There's nothing. A week is simply what it is because God made it that way. It reflects his work in this world. And it's interesting, I think, to note that the church has a weekly calendar as well. We meet weekly because of what God has done in creation. As the Bible unfolds from Genesis to Israel and then into the New Testament, we're encouraged, everyone is encouraged to rest, to celebrate, to worship God on that one day because of what God has done, both in creation and in redemption. And that's a really important point to grasp about the day of rest. It's one day in 7 set aside to worship God in what he's done to save his people. It's not just creation. It's what God has done to save his people. It's clear part of this that we would rest from other things, the normal, everyday other things, and intentionally focus on what God has done. That's the point of this one day a week. And so there are really two key elements to this Sabbath as we can understand it. One is that rest. One is enjoying a day of rest. One is also of worship. And I want to say where we really see Sabbath fulfilled is Jesus. Jesus kept the Sabbath, as you know. If you know your Bible, you'll know that he had no problems breaking with some of the man-made traditions that were built upon Sabbath. And his conflict, he had lots of conflict with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And it wasn't about if we should keep the Sabbath, but how they kept the Sabbath. He was always challenging and taking off those extra layers that had been added on. Here's some examples. Thanks, Reuben. In Mark chapter 2, Jesus approves of his disciples who were hungry, and they would grab some heads of grain as they were walking, technically work in the Jewish or the Pharisee mindset. And Jesus noted that that Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath, right? It's for our good. It's not for us to serve and to make into a false god. And the next one, chapter 3, Mark chapter 3, Jesus was questioning the Pharisees if healing is permitted. And then he heals a man with a shriveled hand. He asks them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? The Pharisees and the teachers of the law had no answer. Jesus makes it clear that Sabbath is not about doing nothing, no work. That's not what Sabbath is about. But Sabbath is about doing good, enjoying God's kingdom and his goodness that he brings, focusing on God's goodness to us in every way. Again, in Luke chapter 13, Jesus restores a woman with an evil spirit. She had a spirit inside her. And he says that it's right for him to heal her on the Sabbath, do work in fact, in order to release her from the evil that is of this world. In Luke chapter 14, just again, the next chapter in Luke, Jesus heals a man from swelling in his body. I imagine that was particularly painful. Next one, thanks Reuben, chapter 14. Yep, there it is. He had swelling in his body, and he asked the Pharisees and the experts in the law, notice how they love the law, is it lawful to heal on a Sabbath or not? They remained silent. They didn't want to give an answer. And so taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. Jesus, I think, gives us a picture of Sabbath, a day of healing, a day of rest, a day of mercy, grace, of restoration. That's the point of Sabbath, not to have extra laws added on. And so, what is the Sabbath for us today? Let's bring it together. Should we all keep the Sabbath as we celebrate it today on the Lord's Day, Sunday? I'm going to say yes. The answer is yes. Yes, we must keep the fourth commandment. It's part of God's revealed will for all people, everywhere. But let's apply it. I want to jump down. How does this work out for us? Let's not just leave it up in, yes, Greg, that's a bit vague, up in the air. I've got two ways. First, I reckon we should really commit to setting aside one day in 7 for this corporate gathering of God's people. That's really critical. We should set it aside for the gathering and for rest. I think in our age, it's our tendency to downplay the importance of this day. In the past, probably they've overextended the importance. But we should not downplay it. I think in the past, some Christians have looked a lot like those Pharisees that we might read about in the Bible, making extra rules, what it looks like. It's probably our problem that we don't hold this day high enough. Here's a question for you to diagnose this for you in your own life. Is Sunday the highlight of your week? Or is it just a day of collapse? Probably for some of us, Friday, Saturday nights, they're the dinners and the parties and the events, the games, the sports. And they're the highlights of our week. On Sunday, well, we do a bit of church and then we fit everything else in on the rest of the day, getting ready for the rest of the week, right? We cram it in. You know, if we're going to make the Lord's Day, this day, a day of worship and not weariness, we need to prepare. We need to plan ahead. I think essentially Sunday is the main day that God has given us to care for our souls, our whole being, the thing that lasts forever, to rest in him. You know, we can gather together like we do, can read a good book in the afternoons, you can spend time in your Bible, you can go for a walk and enjoy creation, you can do lots of things. We can do a lot of that together as well. Are you making time to rest in him deliberately? The second application, I think, I want to say that doing that is a real act of faith. It's a real act of trusting in God and what he's done for you. Stopping all those other things of our week and focusing on him. It's saying, yes, I trust you are more than enough for me. That's faith in action. And I want to say it's a day of great joy, not of gloom. We don't often see that as much, do we? We feel burdened by Sunday sometimes. Here's a question I've got for you to ask yourself. See how you're going with this one. What blessing is God going to give to you by resting and celebrating all that he's done deliberately for one day a week? How will God bless you differently that day than every other? Are you taking time to stop and consider that? It will be different to every other day. And I'm sure God wants us to receive that abundant blessing. And stopping and reflecting and celebrating is critical to that. All right, moving on to the next commandment about honouring our father and mother. This commandment is really a new section in the Ten Commandments. There's the first half, which are vertical between us and God, and the second half are really horizontal between us and others. I think some of us think when Moses came down, we all have this picture that he had 2 tablets, right? It does say he had 2 tablets, and we think 1 to 5 on the first and 6 to 10 on the others. That's what we think. It's probably in a movie. But that's actually not right. Moses would have come down with 2 tablets, but told that, but it would have been 1 to 10 on each. And 1 was given to the people to keep and to refer to read, and the other was placed in the Ark of the Covenant. But that division, that there are 2 kind of halves to the law, is there. It is true. It can be helpful. If commandment 1 of the 10 commandments is that you shall have no other gods before me, and everything follows after that, including resting on the Sabbath, then this commandment is just as essential for all that follow. It's because the parental relationship is that first relationship that we have, the most important relationship. And I think it really shapes all our relationships. Our relationship with our parents, we learn what it is to have someone in authority over us, that we listen to them, we honour them, sometimes do things that we may not think is best according to their wisdom. Someone as a parent has authority because it's for a child's good. And we hopefully learn and know all about love and protection in that relationship. You know, it's no wonder that governments throughout history, and especially today, if you look around the world, have tried to exert power over the family and remove the family's influence, parental influence, so that they can have more authority and power. Because families are where the next generation is taught and nurtured. And so this commandment, I want to say, is far bigger than just kids obeying your parents. That's not what this really is about. It's not about kids doing the odd jobs or listening to their parents, do your homework, take a bath, all those things. This commandment is the foundation for all the others that follow in how we treat others, how we love and honour other people. So what does it mean now to love and honour our parents? Well, I've got three things. I've borrowed this from Calvin. You might have heard of Calvin, the church reformer. He says there's three things that are about honouring our parents. First, it's reverence. Then it's obedience. And thirdly, gratitude. Reverence, obedience, gratitude. First, reverence. Why reverence? Well, it's not because our parents are deserving of it. It's not because they're good, right? I know my failings as a parent are great. I have so many inadequacies and shortcomings. So many times I know that I've done something as a parent and I'm hearing that voice in my head, what are you doing? And then you're ashamed or embarrassed about it. So honour to a parent is not because they're worthy, as God is. We give reverence to parents because simply God has given that responsibility to parents. The word reverence in Hebrew is the word kabot, C-A-B-O-T, kabot. It means to make heavy, to give weight to give glory even. That's because to be a parent is a weighty thing. To be a mother or father is to be given great significance. And so reverence or giving weight is what is due, giving respect. That's what it means to give reverence to a parent. Do you give reverence to your parents if you can? The second, obedience, I think we know what that is. It means that we're to be instructed by our parents while we're a part of their household. Even as adult children and we've left home, I think that we can try and care and listen to our parents. That's good and right. But this implies that parents are giving instructions, that they are teaching and guiding and nurturing and equipping their children to live a life in the Lord. And they're not leaving kids to figure it all out for themselves. Now, we know parents aren't the only ones to do that, but they're primary, aren't they? Then third, gratitude. I think this is the most significant way a child can honour their parent. I certainly didn't understand this as a child, but the life of a parent is one of constant sacrifice. Yeah, it's joyful at times, isn't it? It's wonderful. But the sacrifice of parents is huge, of time, of money, of energy, of their own desires, of sleep, of time as well, of tears, all of those things. It's a privilege that requires great responsibility. Now, a quick question, I'm sure you're all thinking it. Is there a limit to obeying our parents? I want to say yes. All authority can be abused, from governments to parents to churches. And if there's any a time that those in authority put a choice between obeying them and obeying what God would say, it's always to obey God first, right? One has to think of those two tables in the law, the two halves. First and foremost is God. That takes precedence, I think, over the second half, the vertical before the horizontal. But even if there is a situation where we do have to not listen to our parents, I think it is still possible to honour them. It's the way that we do it. So, that's the next commandment. I'm about to finish. I'm trying to go quick so that I can take some questions. If there are any questions, I'll take them soon. But I want to say the big meaning behind this commandment is not so much to say, children, obey your parents, how much parents love to say that. It's that parents are responsible to train and equip their children to love God and love others as God would have them. And children are to continue to receive that instruction under God to grow and serve others. Maybe our tendency as parents is to zoom right into the detail, and I think this command really is kind of a wide-angle lens for the whole child's life. How are you going in honouring your parents? So, as I mentioned earlier, we've now got time for a couple of questions before the kids will come back and we'll sing our final song. It might be about Sabbath, it might be about rest, or it might be about parents. A couple of questions. Anyone got a keen, burning question they want to ask? Cooper? I'm going to take two, so if you've got one, you've got to put your hand up next. Cooper?
For those who, for various reasons, can't rest on the Sabbath, and that could be work or other responsibilities, what should they do to still honour God and try to rest?
Yeah. There are a lot of people that have work that is, on a Sunday, for instance, they're rostered on. And so the general principle I would encourage everyone is to have a day of rest. I would encourage Christians particularly to try and have the Sunday so that we can gather together. But definitely the pattern is for Christians to have a day of rest. So for me, for instance, I will have a Thursday off. That is my day off because Sundays are busy. And it is really a day of work for me, in a sense. And so I will have a day off a week where I'm deliberately putting my faith into action and saying, it's not about how much I do, but I'm trusting God to do it all. And that is the point of my day off. I'd love to work Thursdays. My tendency is to work it, but I force myself to take it to trust Him. So if Sunday is a day that you work and there are good reasons for work on a Sunday, then try and take another day in a week. Good question. Any others? One more question about what we've looked at today. John, last question. Thank you. Yeah. So I'll repeat the question so everyone can hear it. In Hebrews it says, there remains a Sabbath rest for God's people. The way that I understand Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, is that that's talking about the big picture, not the day of rest as what we would do, but it's looking forward to eternal rest, which that writer describes the new creation coming, where we'll rest from everything and in God and of God. So that particular passage, some people do say it's about a day a week of resting and doing nothing. I don't think that's the pattern from the rest of the New Testament, and that's why I don't agree with it, though I can understand it, and if someone said so, I'd happily accept it. But that's talking about the big picture of creation and redemption, where God has got a new world coming, and that's the day that we'll rest, eternal rest in Him. So it's a big book, and it's drawing together a lot of themes, the book of Hebrews, and rest is a big one in that. Yeah.